If most of the world was contaminated, he knew it was impossible to remain untouched. The biometrics of the contaminated were far beyond human norms, leaving an ordinary person without any chance to fight back. He needed power, or it was a death sentence. Besides, he reasoned, if this affliction was being called an evolution, then the species left behind would eventually be buried by history, a fossil for future archaeologists. More than that, he was a doctor. His oath was to heal, even if the patient was himself. Julian Rhodes had never spoken so many consecutive words in his life, not even in his own head. It felt less like an analysis and more like a desperate act of self-persuasion. He finally decided it was time to proceed. Julian had held a scalpel many times, but given his lack of self-destructive tendencies, this would be the first time he would cut into his own flesh. He recalled, with a clinical detachment, listening to his attending physician and a nurse chat while he feigned sleep in a high-security psychiatric facility years ago. They had said his primary personality was perfectly normal, just incapable of processing negative emotions. Those feelings were absorbed by a second, fractured persona. Typically, an excess of negative energy required a release. Some people turned it inward, choosing to harm themselves. Others turned it outward, attacking the world. Unfortunately for everyone else, the personality Julian had split off was the latter type. This made him one of the few patients in the intensive care unit who was not a danger to himself. According to the voice in his head, he needed to make an incision over a major blood vessel and insert the row for incubation. Within 1 to 3 days, he would know the result. As for why he couldn't just swallow it, Julian had already performed an autopsy on someone who tried that. Citing ease of access, observation, and treatment, Julian chose his forearm as the incubator. Sterilization, local anesthetic, grip the scalpel, make the cut. Julian wasn't slicing an artery, so the blood merely welled up, a crimson bead, not the arterial spray of a horror film. The depth was perfect. Inserting the foreign object directly into the vessel could cause an embolism, leading to paralysis at best. Given the diameter of the egg, lodging it in his brachial artery wouldn't be a problem. He slid the pale golden egg into the incision and began suturing. The entire procedure took less than 3 minutes. When he finished the minor surgery, it was 11 in the morning. Lunchtime was approaching. Julian started preparing a meal, scrambling some eggs and reheating leftover chili from the day before. His appetite was usually excellent. Today, however, as he took the first bite, he was overcome with a violent wave of nausea and had to spit it out. 35 minutes post-op, his body temperature began to rise sharply, accompanied by dizziness, heart palpitations, and a gut-wrenching urge to vomit. He knew that excessive vomiting would allow stomach acid to inflict irreversible damage on his esophagus. Yet, he felt an indescribable hunger. As a compromise, he hooked himself up to an 4-drip of glucose. While the solution fed into his vein, he methodically placed his pot and bowl into the dishwasher. As he shut off the faucet, he heard the faint, rhythmic sound of ocean waves. This was possible, as the hospital where he'd done his residency was near the coast, and he remembered the sound well from staff retreats. He knew that due to the moon's position, the gravitational pull on the planet's surface varied, resulting in different tidal patterns in different regions. He could recognize this as the specific cadence of the tide at Crescent Beach. Julian noted on a digital tablet that tinnitus had appeared 55 minutes post-op. 6 hours later, he was burning with a fever of 107. 6 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature at which cellular dysfunction or necrosis was a serious possibility. The voice in his head remarked with a dry, synthetic tone that the fact he hadn't passed out was likely a side effect of the evolution. It confessed that it felt a normal person would have simply chosen to sleep. Julian was forcing himself to stay conscious, viciously pinching the nerve cluster below his nose whenever he felt himself drifting into blackness. He knew a coma was a protective mechanism, a way for the body to insulate itself from overwhelming pain. A film of sweat slicked his skin. He shook his head, his voice a rasp as he explained that if he was going to die, he wanted to at least be awake for it. A conscious death, or perhaps a conscious rebirth. 24 hours after the operation, scales sprouted on his arm. At the 30-hour mark, they vanished. By the third day, the fever broke, and the physical distress began to recede. His body temperature, while stable, was unnervingly low at 80 degrees. Modern digital thermometers were rarely wrong. Julian opened his eyes and looked down at his hand. The scar from his incision was gone, leaving only a neat, faint line. He could feel something moving within his blood vessels. It was fast, active, a symbiotic state with the larval kingfish. A congratulatory thought echoed in his mind, informing him that he had been enhanced. He could now tear apart 3 of those things like Kevin Joe with one hand. It wasn't a delusion, then. Symbiosis and parasitism were 2 entirely different states. In fact, perhaps because Julian had remained conscious throughout the integration, the outcome was even better than the system had anticipated. His body and mind had been in a constant state of resistance. The agony, enough to make a person pass out and wake up repeatedly, had only caused him to sweat profusely. He felt an intense urge to shower, but there hadn't been rain recently, and the water in his filtration tank was running low. He settled for a quick sponge bath. Afterward, he conducted a few simple experiments in his kitchen. Julian took out a heavy chef's knife and, without a change in expression, swung it at his own arm. There was a dull thud, a resonant impact like a cleaver hitting a rack of ribs. His arm had bent the blade of the knife. Julian's brow furrowed. It didn't hurt, but the action seemed to have startled the new inhabitant of his body. A small lump rose on his arm in what felt like a silent protest. He realized this extreme durability was confined to the arm that had grown scales. Other parts of his body were stronger, but not to this terrifying degree. Next, Julian filled a basin with water and submerged his face. An hour passed. Besides a growing discomfort from the low oxygen content in the water, he experienced no signs of drowning or asphyxiation. Other potential changes couldn't be tested due to the limitations of his apartment. Julian finally voiced the question that concerned him most, asking how, now that the kingfish had hatched, he was supposed to cure other people's infections. The voice replied with feigned innocence that it had told him on the first day. Julian thought back, and 2 words surfaced in his mind: consume and evolve. He frowned, pointing out that the kingfish was inside him. He questioned if he had to remove it every time he needed to feed. The voice suggested that he could try finding an infected person and see what happens. Julian turned his head to look at the gloomy sky outside his window. It was 7 in the evening, but it was already pitch black. Due to a severe power shortage, 3 days ago the city of Port Caligo had started implementing rolling blackouts from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. He mused that he had been cooped up for long enough, and it was time to test things out. The blackouts weren't entirely due to power supply issues. It had recently been discovered that the city's mutated contaminants were phototropic, drawn to light in the darkness. This was why night patrol wardens always carried high-powered tactical flashlights. For the past few days, the city's central plaza had been brilliantly illuminated, a beacon in the dark. It was piled high with the corpses of the contaminated. The cleanup crews couldn't keep up, and some had begun to rot, emitting a pungent, fishy stench that, when mixed together, smelled like a 50-year-old fermented fish canning factory. Liam Thorne emptied another magazine. The monsters in the distance collapsed before they could get close. The ground at his feet was littered with spent shell casings and the wrappers of military-grade stimulants. Liam hadn't slept in 5 days. For a warden, this wasn't fatal, but it left him feeling frayed and mentally drained. There were too many. Port Caligo was a densely populated city, and the contamination had spread faster than anyone imagined. The types of mutations were bizarre and numerous. There were the less aggressive spawners, humanoids that sprayed eggs at anyone they saw. At least 2/3 of the contaminated were infected by them. Then there were the more hostile Nashus, abnormally sensitive to living humans. These contaminants possessed rudimentary intelligence and would create noise to attract spawners to complete the infection. When the density of contaminants in an area became too high, the Nashus would simply start eating. Finally, there were the rarest kind, the stationary but constantly growing blooms. The most troublesome bloom was a former workaholic from the tech industry. During the initial quarantine, he had voluntarily snuck back into his office to work overtime. After becoming a bloom, he continued his competitive streak. Now, the lush green algae sprouting from his body had shattered the windows of the tech campus, sprawling down the glass facade for dozens of feet. The algae grew from the bloom's stomach, and though green, it looked like segments of intestines. On the thick leaves grew eyes used for observation and contamination. In short, it was deeply unsettling. Maintenance crews repairing circuits didn't dare look up. The most terrifying part, according to drone footage, was that the contaminant seemed unaware of its condition, still endlessly typing the last line of code it had been working on before it turned. Because of this, Command hadn't dared cut power to the tech park, and even had to perform network maintenance every so often, lest the creature notice the internet was down and decide to take its algae on a city tour. Its contamination value had reached a staggering 1,200. Command decided to wait until the general situation was under control before sending Axton White to handle the removal. The contamination sickness generally followed an evolutionary principle, but it often defied normal scientific explanation. A voice crackled in Liam's earpiece. It was dispatch. He was informed that his biometrics showed a corruption level of 52%, and they were recommending an immediate return to the control center for rest and treatment. Liam's response was curt. He didn't need it. He expertly swapped magazines, stating that he was on the last sector and wanted to finish early. Currently, there were 62 wardens stationed in Port Caligo. 12 of them were newly awakened combat types. In previous years, these rookies would have trained at headquarters for at least 3 years before deployment. But these were desperate times with a severe shortage of wardens, forcing them to adopt a learn-on-the-job approach. Axton White was on the city's perimeter, using his gift to isolate the contamination. Liam and 3 others were in the central plaza, responsible for eliminating the bulk of the contaminants. 7 wardens were guarding the shelter. The remaining 50 were divided into 25 squads, cleaning up any hidden contaminants. With detectors from the Research Institute and the fact that the mutations were recent, the contamination values were capped around 200. It wasn't particularly dangerous, more a matter of physical labor. Now, only the Quivira district, the origin point of this outbreak, remained to be cleared. In the Quivira district, at the Silver Creek Apartments, Julian Rhodes, dressed in black and armed with a knife, stealthily opened his door. He murmured to himself that his night vision seemed to have improved. He planned on taking down 10 of them tonight. After gently closing the door, he noticed something strange. The steel security door of his apartment had several deep indentations, as if someone had hammered it with immense force. Julian inspected them. They weren't from a human hand. They looked more like the print of a giant frog. The air was thick with the inescapable coppery smell of blood. Due to the blackout, the hallway was pitch black. Julian's hand hovered over his phone. The voice in his head suddenly warned him that while there were no contaminants in his immediate line of sight, they were drawn to light. It advised against using any light source if he didn't want to be swarmed. It reminded him that he now had night vision and needed to learn to accept the ways he was different from humans. The ambient light at night was limited. Night vision worked by reflecting infrared light off the retina, making it visible. Julian's eyes now glowed with a faint red light, like a feline's, but in his vision, the world was cast in shades of green. The door to his neighbor's apartment was wide open. The inside of the metal door was covered in horrific scratch marks, evidence of a desperate struggle. The floor of the hallway was sticky with a viscous liquid. Julian nudged it with his foot. It was dried blood, tacky like syrup. The blood trail had been dragged. It paused at his door, and after failing to break it down, continued down the hall, disappearing around the corner. Due to his profession, Julian's schedule rarely aligned with his neighbors, but he remembered a family of 4 living next door. A couple, a child, and a grandparent. He stared at the bloodstain for a moment, then tightened his grip on his knife and entered the apartment, murmuring a quiet apology. The smell of blood inside was much stronger than in the hallway. Judging by the amount, there was definitely more than one victim. Julian followed the trail into the living room and, not paying attention, stepped on a severed hand. He looked down and observed it for a moment. The hand likely belonged to an adult female. The wound showed clear signs of being gnawed. Other than that, there were no visible human remains. It seemed the contaminants didn't leave bones. The living room was the main scene, but the blood trail originated from the child's room down the hall. The room was warmly decorated, with a corner full of Lego toys, showing the child was cherished. Though the contaminant was gone, the room was filled with a damp, fishy smell. A chair was overturned, and several broken ropes lay on the floor. It was clear what had happened. The child had been the one to get sick, but the parents hadn't wanted to send him to the shelter. So they had kept him tied up in his room, waiting for a miracle. At first, the sick child might have listened to his parents. Later, he was just a monster that wanted to eat them. One day, the monster broke free. A tragic tale of parental love. The voice in his head then calmly suggested he look up, as it seemed the creature had crawled back along the ceiling. A drop of stinking, saline fluid landed at Julian's feet. The heavy fishy smell in the room wasn't from a long-confined sick person. It was because the contaminant was right there with him. Julian looked up. A small boy was clinging to the ceiling like a gecko. His hands were as big as his head, and his webbed fingers gripped the plaster. His stomach was bloated as if from overeating, resembling a woman in her final month of pregnancy. A grotesque smile spread across the contaminant's face. It opened its mouth, revealing 2 rows of sharp teeth, and its long tongue shot out like a predator's. The papillae on its tongue stood erect, like tiny, sharp barbs. Having dissected one before, Julian was prepared. He now had some understanding of this type of contaminant. Gnashes were fast and strong, but their attack methods were simple. Either pounce or use their tongue. They could spit a corrosive stomach acid, but not in large quantities. If he could overcome the nausea, his current physical condition made it a manageable threat. Julian considered for only a moment. He didn't dodge. Instead, he reached out and grabbed the tongue. The barbs covering it scraped his hand, but the tongue itself was slick and greasy, like a piece of raw liver. A look of clear surprise crossed the contaminant's face. But its eyes were already so wide that it made no discernible difference. Julian yanked hard, pulling it from the ceiling. The contaminant hit the floor with a heavy thud, making a racket. It was a basic animal instinct to avoid harm. It tried to flee, but Julian's grip was surprisingly strong, holding it fast. The contaminant cowered in the corner, letting out a struggling hiss, watching in terror as Julian, one hand holding its tongue, the other a scalpel, approached with a calm smile. He told the creature that while he wasn't exactly a surgeon, the circumstances were urgent, so it would have to do. After all, he was a board-certified physician. The scalpel slid open the gnash's abdomen, thrashed for a moment, then lay still. From its stomach, Julian pulled out some partially digested human remains and a head. A fully mutated contaminant like this had no chance of reverting to human form. As for how to resolve the contamination, he didn't need to be told. He would see it soon enough. A section of the blood vessels on his arm bulged. The dormant kingfish larva was waking up. Scales, like pieces of armor, emerged on his previously smooth arm, covering the skin. Then, the scales lifted and white, thread-like tendrils extended from the gaps, connecting to the gnasha on the floor. They began to feed. Like drawing blood, the white filaments slowly turned red. Julian reached out and touched one of the threads. He flinched from a jolt of pain. Not his hand, but the thread itself hurt, like someone had touched his brainstem with their bare hands. No wonder the kingfish hadn't come out earlier. If the Nasha hadn't been dead, a slight struggle would have been enough to send Julian into paroxysms of agony. Perhaps due to the symbiosis, as the kingfish fed, Julian felt a sensation like eating. His stomach was warm and comfortable. He closed his eyes, a faint, unnatural flush coloring his pale face, as if he were drunk. The voice in his head went silent. It had thought a normal person witnessing this would have a mental breakdown. It had been prepared to act as a therapist, but Julian was unexpectedly composed. Julian answered its unspoken thought with a flat expression. He asked if it considered humans to be overly fragile. He acknowledged that according to its theory, they were an incompletely evolved, lower life form, but in the millions of years from ape to man, humanity had never given up on saving itself. The feeding lasted for half a minute. His spirit threshold increased by 10. The system let out a cold laugh, whispering that the fool's prediction had been good. If the kingfish host were a contaminant, devouring all the contaminants in the city could indeed push it past the threshold. A shame it had run into him. Its voice was too low, and with the sound of the tide still echoing in Julian's ears, he didn't quite catch it. The milky white tendrils retracted into Julian's body as if they had never been there. Perhaps because the apartment complex had already been swept once, Julian didn't encounter another contaminant until he left the area. The police tape at the complex entrance was still there, but the guards were gone. Only a scorched security booth hinted at what had happened. By all rights, the entire city should have been dark, but the direction of Quivira Park was brightly lit, the light so intense it hurt his eyes. He was told that it was the Contagion Control Center, conducting contaminant retrieval. He could go take a look if he was interested. Julian wasn't particularly interested and looked away. The city at night was unnervingly quiet. Only when passing certain alleys could he hear heavy panting mixed with muffled protests. At such times, Julian would follow the sound into the alley. He wasn't there to break them up. He was there to join in. Julian rubbed his stomach. He was a firm believer in the 80% full rule, but he hadn't felt this stuffed in a long time. In one night, his spirit threshold had increased by a total of 70. Added to the 100 from the initial fusion, he was now a warden with a spirit threshold of 170. This wasn't a high number. According to the Institute standards, he was just a bottom-tier Class 1 warden. However, Port Caligo was his home turf. The bloodline suppression gave him an almost unbeatable advantage here. Besides, a warden's strength wasn't solely determined by their spirit threshold. He felt full and decided it was time to go home. He'd come back tomorrow. He rather hoped to find a contamination patient who hadn't fully mutated. According to the system's theory, he could probably treat them. But such things couldn't be forced. He couldn't just walk around with a megaphone going door to door asking. As Julian walked the streets, a chilly east wind blew. The phone in his pocket vibrated slightly. It was an airdrop notification. A message from a stranger popped up. "Dude, what are you doing outside? A few security guards in our complex got infected, and no one's come to collect them yet. You're asking for a death wish, man." A kind-hearted stranger, it seemed. The phone vibrated again. "Stay out of the light. Those things are really sensitive to it. Don't you watch the news? How did you even get out on the street?" Then, a panicked message. "Shit. They're coming. Run." Just as the message came through, a light turned on the 13th floor of the building behind Julian. A petite girl stood at the window, anxiously tapping on the glass, making a noise, then quickly ran away. A moment later, Julian received a new message. "This whole building is my family's. I'm going to hide in another unit. This is all I can do to help you." The voice in his head commented that while it had no great affection for the human species, weak, selfish, pitiful, it had to admit that humans sometimes made perplexing gestures that it found almost endearing. The view from his perspective suddenly shook. A creature nearly 10 feet tall, with a human-like body and a massive fish head, was hopping towards them. It was hunched over, its head disproportionately large. It looked like a catfish. Its lips opened and closed, and its 4 whiskers twitched in the still air. The voice congratulated him on encountering the first mini-boss of this level, a catfish brute with a contamination value of 400. This creature had been a competitive eater in its former life, and it had retained its appetite after mutating. It had eaten 60 people in 3 days, growing to its current size. It didn't just eat people. It ate its own kind, making it more aggressive than a typical spawner. The good news was that the eggs it spat, while disgusting, wouldn't contaminate him. Also, its large head wasn't for nothing. There was a human saying, "Deep feelings, 1 gulp, shallow feelings, a lick." This fish seemed to have deep feelings for him. His weak spot was its gills. He was told to be careful. The catfish brute's intelligence wasn't high. It had been heading for Julian, but upon seeing the light from the building, it was quickly distracted. It lumbered heavily towards the apartment building. Julian had only encountered Gnashes so far and had yet to dissect such a large spawner. Plus, he believed his chances of survival against contaminants were slightly higher than average. So, he turned on his phone's flashlight. The catfish brute whipped its head around. It seemed to feel challenged and charged at Julian with unbelievable speed. The night's feeding had significantly improved Julian's physical abilities. He reacted almost instantly, retreating quickly to dodge the brute's attack. But the creature was just too big. One of its whiskers scraped Julian's arm. The seemingly soft whisker was sharper than a blade. His sleeve was torn, and blood seeped out. The brute suddenly froze. The voice in his head cursed. His blood. It should have thought of his blood. Julian had never heard the usually sarcastic voice sound so panicked. It told him to stop fighting and run to the contagion control center. Now, immediately, to Quivira Park if he didn't want to be swarmed. Quivira Park, the epicenter of the outbreak, was proving its reputation. While the numbers weren't overwhelming, the danger and contamination levels were far higher than in other areas. A steady stream of bizarrely shaped contaminants surged forward like moths to a flame. The Quivira River was nearly stained red with blood. A thin sheen of sweat appeared on Liam's forehead. To handle the contaminants here, a total of 16 wardens were stationed in the park. More than usual, but he still felt overwhelmed. Some of the contaminants here had even evolved rudimentary intelligence. However, at 2 in the morning, the creatures froze as if a pause button had been pressed. Though he didn't know why, Liam wasn't about to let the opportunity pass. But after only 2 minutes of cleanup, the contaminants in front of him seemed to wake from a dream and turned their heads in the same direction. Their faces showed varying degrees of frenzy, like starving hounds that had caught the scent of carrion. Someone let out the first croak, and a second later, none of the contaminants paid any attention to the brightly lit Quivira Park. They flowed like a tide in one direction. A nearby analyst looked on in shock, asking what was happening. Liam was stunned for a moment. Then a possibility occurred to him, and his face turned grim. He said he had only heard of something like this once. It was when the first Institute's test subject, codenamed Genesis, awakened. A rare healing-type gift, said to be number 1 on the gift sequence list. That day, the Institute was also besieged by contaminants. To protect Genesis, they had to seal him in a life support chamber. The analyst, though a warden, was a support type with a low spirit threshold and usually stationed at base. This was the first he'd heard of such a thing. His expression was blank as he asked about healing gifts. Liam replied that it was obvious why he hadn't heard. There were only 3 in the world. 1 was locked in a life support chamber, too dangerous to release. 1 was being coddled at headquarters like a god. The last one was overseas. Liam put away his rifle and opened his comms, his eyes bloodshot. He growled into the mic, telling Axton White to stop watching the show from the wall. It seemed someone in the city had awakened a healing gift. He cursed their timing and told him to get ready for cleanup. Julian couldn't remember the last time he had been chased like this. It must have been during a track meet in his school days. He had good stamina and was fast. Back then, There were always 7 or 8 classmates trailing behind him. He never thought that over a decade later, he'd re-experience that same thrilling tension. Julian did a quick scan. Contaminants were converging from all directions. No place looked safe. He steeled himself and chose the most direct route to his destination. The voice explained that he wasn't a contaminant, but his symbiosis with the kingfish made his blood extremely attractive to these things born of infection. He could see that. The nearby infected were swarming towards him. While the numbers weren't huge yet, their grotesque appearances were enough to turn one's stomach. Julian's adrenaline surged. He demanded to know why the voice hadn't told him this sooner. The system retorted forcefully that it wasn't its fault. If his spirit threshold hadn't been so low, it wouldn't be suffering from amnesia. It then pointed out a black SUV to his left, with the keys inside. It also suggested he take off his shirt. Due to the slime on the catfish brute's whisker, Julian's arm was still bleeding freely. The dark red blood had soaked a large patch of his sleeve, and its strong scent was briefly attracting the infected. To his left, there was not only an SUV but also several unusually frenzied infected. A Nasha leaped into the air, trying to tackle Julian, but was kicked 10 feet away. Julian smashed the car window with his elbow, vaulted inside, started the engine, and floored the accelerator in one smooth motion. He asked if this might be a bit indecent. He was assured it was fine. He was told to hurry and strip. Julian, who for over 2 decades had been a law-abiding citizen, complied, but not completely. Fearing a public indecency charge, he ripped off the blood-soaked part of his sleeve and threw it out the window. If the bleeding didn't stop, he could always rip off more. It was more cost-effective than throwing out the whole shirt. Behind the car, a horde of bizarrely shaped contaminants swarmed his discarded piece of clothing, fighting over it violently, even piling on top of each other. It looked like a meet and greet between an idol and their crazed fans. Finally, the 10-foot-tall catfish brute defeated the other, weaker Nashus and swallowed the bloody fabric. Smelling the air, it continued to chase after Julian. The SUV fishtailed, dodging a Nasha that tried to crash into its windshield. Julian lived downtown where traffic was a nightmare. He preferred to walk to work, so after getting his driver's license, he had barely touched a car. He never expected his next driving experience to be in such a high-stakes scenario. Thankfully, the streets were empty. Contaminants continuously slammed into the vehicle. The metal roof groaned under the scraping of their claws, which sent sparks flying. After shaking off some of the lower-level contaminants, the group following Julian became clearer. 2 spawners, 3 Nashus, all larger than their normal counterparts, had reached the Class 1 contaminant standard and possessed low-level intelligence. Julian smelled the repulsive fishy stench. The SUV, with its 7-liter engine, was at its maximum speed, but it was only slightly faster than these contaminants. The ones with low-level intelligence were different. They had even learned to spit sticky stomach acid at the tires. The rubber tires sizzled as they were corroded. The voice asked if he felt like time was crawling. Who would have thought only 6 minutes had passed since this began? The good news was that the Contagion Control Center had noticed the anomaly, and reinforcements were on their way. Julian could barely see the road anymore. The SUV had plowed through one contaminant after another, and the endless stream of them was making his skin crawl. His ears were filled with their screeches, but Julian knew that the more dire the situation, the calmer he needed to be. He took each step with caution. The sound of the tide returned, accompanied by the deafening roar of a helicopter's rotors. A row of blinding searchlights shone down, drawing some of the fire. Liam Thorne narrowed his eyes and, with a single shot, killed the Nasha that had leaped onto Julian's car. The Nasha's tongue was halfway inside. He reported that the target was located. He ordered his team to rappel down and provide cover to bring the person back, with medics on standby. Even though they had found the target, Liam didn't dare relax. He shot 2 more while speaking. The mission was top priority. With the covering fire from above, Julian's precarious situation finally improved. He seized the opportunity to open the door and jump out of the leaking SUV, climbing onto the roof to wait for the helicopter rescue. Just as the rescue ladder was getting closer, an excited shout echoed in his ears. "I'm coming! I'm coming! Where's the healer?" The moment the voice fell, a pair of hands wrapped around Julian's waist and lifted him up. The speed was incredible, like a gust of wind. In the helicopter, Liam Thorne roared, "Axton White, you lunatic!" In a few seconds, before Julian could react, Axton's feet had landed on the rooftop of a shopping mall. Below, the contaminants, having lost their target, let out furious roars and swarmed the mall, following the scent. The mall's main entrance was sealed. The spawners raged impotently below, while the Nashes began to slowly climb the building. Axton looked down at Julian and grinned. "Well, now you're quite a looker." His appearance was striking, the most noticeable feature being his silver eyes. For pupils spun in his sockets, eerie and captivating. Julian thanked him and asked to be put down. Axton replied that he couldn't, as he was here to protect him and it wasn't safe yet. With that, he extended a hand and looked coldly down at the ground below, uttering two words, immovable. Mountain. His gift, gravity, wasn't ranked very high on the sequence list. But combined with Axton's spirit threshold of nearly 9,000, against these low-level contaminants, it was like the Grim Reaper's scythe. Below, the swarming contaminants were crushed as if by an invisible weight. Regardless of size or type, they were all flattened into pulp. Blood splattered everywhere. Not a single one was spared. Axton put Julian down and asked, "Wasn't I cool?" He then introduced himself as Axton White, flashing a smile that should have been harmless but for the two sharp canines that made him look no less threatening than the contaminants. In Julian's mind, the system provided more detailed information. Axton White, 29, height 5 feet 8 inches, so he wore 2-inch lifts. Oh, that wasn't important. Spirit threshold 8,700, corruption level 42%. Gifts, barrier, flash step, gravity. Julian briefly shook his hand. Julian Rhodes. Later, at the Contagion Control Center. Julian had considered calling them on the second day of the outbreak but was stopped by the system. He never thought that 20 days later, he would be brought here. The center had arranged a small room for him to rest. The good news, the voice informed him, was that although he hadn't awakened a second gift, they had mistaken him for a healer. Information on healing gifts was scarce due to the lack of cases, so they didn't know much. Julian was showering. Due to the water shortage, his shower water was filtered rainwater, boiled before use. It had been a long time since he'd had such a luxury. He asked the voice why it had kept him from contacting the control center and why it was so wary of the Institute. He wasn't worried about surveillance here, as his conversations with the system were all in his head. After a moment of silence, the voice explained that wardens weren't limited to one gift. Besides their own awakened abilities, they could also acquire them from external sources. For the future of humanity, they would perform complex surgeries to transfer his gift to a more suitable host. But this transfer would cause irreversible damage to his brain, such as intellectual disability, cerebral atrophy, or brain death. And during the extraction process, the donor needed to be fully conscious. The Institute wasn't a monolith. Some were driven by lofty ideals, while others saw the contamination sickness as a stepping stone. Inhumane experiments were common. He might think the sickness was a recent phenomenon, but there had been cases since the last century. As people gradually awakened, some foolish ordinary humans thought they could control the wardens. Besides, the contaminants evolved much faster than the wardens. There were now many near-godlike beings, though in the Institute's files, they were all classified as S-class contaminants. Julian's wound was cleaned. After his shower, he dried his hair. A staff member led him to an office. Liam Thorne stood up to greet him, pulling out a chair with a friendly smile. "Dr. Rhodes, I didn't expect we'd meet again." At the head of the conference table, Axton White had his feet up on the wooden surface, lazily telling Liam not to get chummy with him. He was the one who saved him. He then told Liam his emotional state was unstable and he should leave. Liam pointed to the door, reminding him he was speaking to the deputy director of the Special Operations Division and the head of the second unit. Axton was furious. Liam couldn't be bothered with him. Julian cautiously surveyed his surroundings. No windows, only one entrance. Liam tried to appear as gentle as possible. You don't need to be nervous. We're just going to run a simple test. He held up a device that looked like a digital thermometer and scanned Julian with it. 2 lines of numbers appeared on the screen. Spirit threshold, 174. Corruption level, 1. Axton's eyebrows shot up. Only 1? It was unbelievably low. It was hard to imagine that the calm young man before them had been struggling for survival in a pile of contaminants just an hour ago. Julian withdrew his hand and asked calmly if there was any special significance. Liam assured him the numbers were excellent. A threshold of 174 was quite good for someone newly awakened. Normally, it was around 15. Julian was too embarrassed to say that when he first awakened, his spirit threshold was actually 0. Liam's eyes were fervent. Dr. Rhodes, after you awakened, did you have any sense of your ability? In the last century, the head of the Institute, before his death, compiled a gift sequence table, ranking all gifts by strength. The higher the rank, the rarer the gift. I am all-knowing, sequence number 6. I don't really get this ranking. I think I should at least be in the top 3. Genesis, a pure healing ability, is number 1. Humans and contaminants shared the gift sequence. Julian didn't quite understand either. It seemed information was crucial everywhere. Otherwise, a chatty system wouldn't be ranked 6th. Currently, the 3 remaining healers in the world had the gifts Genesis 1, Resurrection 12, and Fusion 29. The only unknown healing gift left was number 25, Devour. That was what he had to impersonate. Julian asked inwardly if healing gifts weren't at risk of being extracted. The voice explained that extraction wasn't always successful. Besides, the Institute wasn't entirely full of bad people. Laws were a higher dimension than gifts, like rules. Explaining it would be wordy, so it just said he was lucky to have it. After the brief mental exchange, Julian looked up at the men opposite him. He thought for a long time and replied, I feel a little hungry. The shelter and the control center were 8 miles apart. Silas Kane was inside, passing the time by studying a vocabulary book since his movements were restricted. If it weren't for this sudden outbreak, he would have been studying for his GRE. He wondered if he would get a refund on the registration fee. The shelter was restless at night. They served food, but not what the infected craved. The special medicine could slow the mutation, but it couldn't alleviate the gnawing hunger in their bellies. Every night, some infected went missing. No one reported it, so no one did anything about it. Silas's new neighbor was a spawner in the late 2nd stage of mutation. Barring any medical intervention, he would be dragged out for cremation in a few days. The neighbor gently knocked on the paper-thin metal wall. Stop studying. I know you're too hungry to sleep too. Silas put down his book and hummed in agreement. Doctor, even if this sickness is covered, I don't think we're going to make it. You know the patient in building 2? The next morning, during rounds, there was just blood on the sheets. Bits of flesh stuck to the ceiling. They said he died of his illness, but he was eaten in the middle of the night. But the one who ate him was taken away the next day. Silas's voice was gentle. Justice may be delayed, but it is never absent. His neighbor got annoyed. What do you mean, the one who ate him? Like you're not one of us. It's better to live a bad life than die a good death. Who wants to die? The neighbor's tone was agitated. I just transferred from building 3. This is like the ICU, right? How long have you been here? Silas thought for a moment. Most of the late stage 2 patients end up here. But I haven't been here long. Maybe a week. I didn't expect the order here to be so good. Buildings 1, 2, and 3 are a madhouse at night. The guards can't control it. Hey man, I'm a little hungry. Silas replied softly. There are apples and instant noodles in the room. They're replenished daily. The neighbor grunted. A moment later, the sound of chewing came from the next room. Silas's fingers still rested on the cover of his English book. He had a feeling tonight wouldn't be peaceful. It was clear the new neighbor was a troublemaker. Otherwise, the guards wouldn't have put him next door. Sure enough, later that night, the sound of nails scraping against the thin metal wall began. Sharp fingers pierced the metal, making a loud noise. Normally, the infected had enhanced senses. The buzz of a single mosquito at night could keep the whole building awake. Yet, faced with such a loud noise, everyone remained unmoved. The infected in Building 4 sneered in the dark, turned over, and uninterestedly pulled their blankets over their heads. The metal wall was torn open. The neighbor ripped through the metal and muttered to himself, "Sorry, I know this is wrong, but I'm really too hungry. Can't take it anymore. You die if I eat you, you die if you're cremated. Better to die in my stomach. I'll thank you for the rest of my life." As he spoke, the bald neighbor felt like he had stepped on something. He looked down and saw what appeared to be a long tentacle. The tentacle was covered in fleshy nodules, and on each nodule was an eye. Some eyes looked pitying, others mocking. "Is that so?" Silas asked gently, sitting at his desk. The neighbor stiffly raised his neck to look at the person in front of him. Silas's face was still human, but from the waist down, his legs were gone. In their place were octopus-like tentacles. The tentacles filled the small, narrow room like plant roots, clinging to the walls. Building 4 wasn't without incidents. On the first night, when the guards woke up, all the infected in Building 4 were dead except for Silas. Silas claimed it was self-defense, and the surveillance footage confirmed it. Although infected, Silas never initiated an attack and even helped maintain order. Plus, he never progressed to the third stage of mutation, which left the higher-ups with a mixed opinion of him. But by the third day, the guards no longer had this problem. They determined that all of them combined would be no match for Silas. Because of him, Building 4, which should have been the most chaotic, was the most orderly ward in the shelter. A tentacle wrapped around the neighbor's body, giving him no chance to struggle. Silas's face still wore a gentle smile. "Since you understand that it's better to live a bad life than die a good death, why did you come looking for death?" The sound of viscous liquid filled the small room. Silas didn't eat with his mouth but with his tentacles. The tentacles bored into the infected's head. Soon, the nearly 7-foot-tall infected was sucked dry, leaving only a skeleton. The guard turned on the light, his hand trembling as he unlocked the door. He pushed the door open. The small room was filled with the smell of blood. Initially, Silas's living space was only 100 square feet. But as his tentacles grew longer, the guards had to knock down the walls of the surrounding rooms to accommodate him. Silas pointed to the desiccated corpse on the floor and explained, "He attacked me first." The guard nodded hastily. I understand. He was already outmatched. If he didn't show some sense, his life in the shelter would become very dangerous." The guard continued, "Actually, I came to find you tonight because I received a notice from above." Silas looked surprised. Then his expression turned calm. "I understand. Can I have 2 minutes to write a will?" "No, it's not the furnace." The guard was sweating profusely. "The control center sent a notice. They want us to find 2 infected people in different stages to test a new drug. We thought of sending you. Although there are risks with experimental drugs in your current state, the medicine here is no longer effective. It might be worth a try. Of course, it's mainly up to you." Silas was silent for a moment. "I have no objection." The guard quickly took out a scanner. "Good, I'll scan you first, then we'll go to the control center." According to international standards, a corruption level over 100 no longer classified one as human but as having completed an evolution. Silas rose, standing up from his chair for the first time. His head touched the ceiling. Black tentacles writhed and coiled, forming a mass below his waist. The scanner beeped alarmingly as it passed over him, flashing a red light. Silas Kane. Corruption level 99. Julian sat at the examination table, flanked by Axton on his left and Liam on his right. After all, he was about to face an infected person directly. The slightest misstep, and the fragile, combat-ineffective healer would be killed. Thus, he needed powerful protection. Liam handed him a circular metal patch. This sticks to the skin and can monitor your corruption level. Frequent contact with contaminants and overuse of your gift will cause your corruption level to rise. This process is usually irreversible. For example, Axton's 4 eyeballs had grown out, and there was no way to remove them. A healer cannot heal himself. Healers were extremely cautious about using their gifts. Julian asked the system if he could really eat more. Although he felt he had digested some on the way, his stomach still felt uncomfortably full. The voice assured him it wasn't a problem. Once he reached his limit, he would break through. They were bringing him clean food on a platter. It was much better than going door to door looking for stray fish. Julian thought it made sense. The first to be brought in was a first-stage infected. The man looked recently contaminated and not very dangerous. His face showed only minor mutations, and he hadn't even fully grown gills. The infected man was tied to a chair, his expression terrified, like a lamb to the slaughter. Julian stood up and slowly approached him, then extended his hand. A layer of fine, translucent scales appeared, and thin white threads emerged, rooting themselves in the infected man's head. The scene was somewhat eerie, but the 2 men in the room were veterans of fighting contaminants and were unfazed by strange sights. One by one, the fish eggs were drawn out. The kingfish larva, sensing danger, lay dormant inside Julian, quiet as if hibernating. On the monitor, the infected man's corruption level dropped significantly, from 57 all the way down to 0. It would take a few days for his body to recover, but his mind was clearly much clearer. Thank you, Doctor. Julian's corruption level, however, barely changed, increasing by only 0.07. The precision of this instrument was much higher than that of ordinary electronic scanners. Seeing the result, a look of joy appeared on Liam's face. This showed that Julian could indeed cure the contamination, and his own data was remarkably stable. Axton recorded the data and transmitted it back to headquarters. Liam asked if Dr. Rhodes wanted to take a break. Julian was feeling very full and was about to nod, but the system suddenly spoke. It suggested he watch, as he wouldn't be able to see it later. See what? The transition from human to contaminant was called evolution. But evolution could succeed or fail. What he had seen so far, whether the infected or the contaminants, were all failed mutations. But the next case was a perfect evolution. Julian asked what the difference was between a perfect evolution and a failed one. The voice replied that it was roughly the difference between a phoenix and a chicken. Julian was intrigued. The system's little trick had successfully piqued his interest. He smiled and said, "I'm fine. Let's get it all done at once." So, Liam spoke into the intercom. A moment later, for burly soldiers carried in an iron cage. The cage had been urgently transported from the zoo. Its surface was covered with an electrified net to prevent the prey inside from escaping. Inside the cage was an octopus. Its thick tentacles filled the 10-foot-high cage, and the eyes on their surface looked around, full of curiosity and a hint of malice. Axton, all 4 pupils in his eyes spinning like a compass, frowned. This is no different from a contaminant. Who sent this? As soon as he finished speaking, the tentacles parted, revealing Silas Kane inside. Silas gripped the bars, his expression one of delight. Dr. Rhodes, I didn't expect to see you again. Julian stared at his face, somewhat surprised. He hadn't expected this. He thought the young man from the shelter would have turned into a Nasha. I'm relieved to see you're okay. I've been worried about you these past few days. Silas asked why Dr. Rhodes was here. Julian replied evasively, treating patients. Silas smiled, his eyes curving. Then it seems I'm your patient again. Although Silas had been behaving docilely, Axton's gaze remained vigilant. Julian moved a little closer to the cage, then stopped and extended his hand. The white threads spread out again, but hesitated as they approached Silas. Silas's expression was encouraging. He even extended a tentacle to touch Julian's white threads. Unsurprisingly, he was shocked by the electric net. But Silas's smile didn't change much. It was clear the net was nothing to him. The threads wrapped around the tentacle. Sensing no resistance, the kingfish became noticeably excited. It began to draw out the source of contamination from Silas's body. The system provided detailed information. Silas Kane, perfect evolution contaminant, contamination value 6,100. See, a fellow class 1 mutation, and he's so much stronger than you. Mutation gift, mimicry, life siphon. Mutation direction, gigantification, tentacles. Julian was shocked. He was already a contaminant. The voice explained that mimicry allowed him to disguise himself. But he still seemed to retain his human thought processes and social behavior. That was why it was called a perfect evolution. The corruption level is dropping, Liam said, his eyes fixed on the monitor, his expression tense and serious. But the speed is slow. A full half-hour passed, and Silas's corruption level only dropped to 90. In contrast, Julian's corruption level rose by 2, and his spirit threshold shot up by 270, now totaling 440. He was about to escape the lowest tier. Stop the experiment, Axton ordered decisively. This one doesn't need to go back to the shelter. Keep him at the control center for now. Liam and Axton were from the same class and had even been roommates. That was why Liam was often disrespectful to him. He knew Axton well. Liam knew Axton wanted to kill him, though he didn't know why. Silas didn't seem upset. Thank you, Dr. Rhodes. Knowing you're okay makes me very happy. The Chinese have a saying about being too weak to handle nourishment. Julian felt that described his current state perfectly. He was weak all over, lethargic, and just wanted to sleep. Julian nodded. Okay, see you tomorrow. Since he was his patient, he needed to be treated, even if he was a contaminant. Silas was taken aback. Then a faint smile appeared on his face, but he didn't reply. He, along with the cage, was locked in a dark, sealed room in the control center. The walls of the room were made of a special material that could maximally affect a contaminant state. The smile on Silas's face slowly faded. The tentacles in the cage writhed, then coalesced and retracted. 2 legs reappeared beneath him. He looked more human than before. But if someone were to scan him, they would find that Silas's corruption level had surpassed the dangerous threshold of 100. On his second day in the shelter, he was no longer human. Silas opened the electric net. The high voltage made his hair stand on end. The tingling sensation was actually quite pleasant. He walked to the door of the room. The door required a 3-part code, impossible for an ordinary person to crack. So, Silas didn't use an ordinary person's method. A tentacle shot out from behind his waist and slammed against the wall in front of him, making a deafening crash. The wall, made of a special alloy, crumbled like tofu, leaving a large hole. The alarm blared, but Silas didn't care. He even had the presence of mind to go to the bathroom mirror to straighten his clothes. At the end of the hall, Axton was on high alert, his eyes full of defense. Gift, barrier. An invisible wall of air enveloped the area, cutting off all of Silas's escape routes. Silas sighed. I don't mind a fight with you, but I don't want Dr. Rhodes to see me like this. Besides, Dr. Rhodes is a light sleeper. A loud noise would wake him up. He turned on the faucet, and his body instantly dissolved into fleshy tendrils and flowed down the drain. Downstream of the Quivira River, bubbles rose on the calm surface. After confirming there was no surveillance, Silas's soaked head emerged from the water. A few tentacles pulled him onto the bank, his massive body flopping ashore. He wasn't used to being underwater yet. But as soon as he got out of the river, Silas sensed someone nearby. His vigilant gaze scanned the surroundings, but he saw no living creatures. This made him want to dive back into the water. Just as he was about to, a voice finally came from behind him. "I've been waiting for you for a long time." The speaker's voice was an elegant female's. Then it changed to a deep male's. "You are my finest creation in Port Caligo." A man in a black robe stepped out of the shadows. He had no mouth, only a single giant eye on his face. "Who are you?" Silas asked, several tentacles behind him slowly writhing into an attack stance. "You can call me Prophet," he said. "The human world no longer welcomes you. In the past 3 hours, your information has been transmitted to the control center's headquarters. Since you haven't started hurting people yet, your priority is low. But I know that person is on their way. He has a bad temper and is currently in a rage. He might just come and take care of you on a whim. He's not on the same level as Axton White. Why don't you come with me?" Silas smiled. "I hate the smell on you." Prophet looked down and smiled. It was a strong smell of death, but he was used to it. "I know. Your heart still tells you that you are a member of human society. But those inferior bipeds are just a species about to be eliminated. The future world will be ours." Prophet's voice was full of temptation. "We are the gods of the new world. I know many things. I can give you greater power." Silas wasn't interested in his long-winded speech, so he turned and walked towards the mountains. "Wait," Prophet said after a long silence, calling out to Silas again. "I know what you want." Prophet opened his eye, his pupil shrinking as he stared into Silas's. "Gift, persuasion. Gift, foresight." Under the influence of the dual gifts, Silas momentarily felt a sense of trust towards the person in front of him. You've always been grateful to him. He saved you from death's door. You were an illegitimate child, abandoned by your birth parents and abused by your adoptive parents. After middle school, you fled that mountain village. Yes, the very one you're heading to now. You want to make those people pay. You're not a good person, but he is. He was a complete stranger to you, yet he paid your medical bills, gave you a job. You only dared to watch him from afar as he went to and from work. You knew you weren't good enough for him. He seemed to come from a good family, was highly educated, and good-looking with many admirers. He might not even be attracted to the same sex. You didn't dare to think it, let alone say it. Prophet couldn't see much. He didn't even know who that person was. But this was enough. The calm on Silas's face was broken, and he even looked angry. No one likes to be seen through so completely. The face behind Prophet's eye curved into a deep smile. "Now, can we talk properly?" "We can," Silas said, his expression returning to calm, his tone measured. "But first, you need to understand one thing. I don't retain many human emotions." He was indeed special to the human me. But now, not necessarily. "I trust you're not foolish enough to use that as a bargaining chip for your invitation." Prophet smiled and nodded. "I understand. When I was human, I had a very obedient son. He lives in this city now. I thought I would always maintain my fatherly love for him. Never mind. Let's see what stage the kingfish on you has reached." Silas's brow furrowed in confusion. "What kingfish?" Prophet was momentarily stunned. "Is not parasitizing you?" Julian was so tired that he fell asleep almost as soon as his head hit the pillow. But the unfamiliar surroundings made him wake up several times during the night, always suspecting he was about to be assassinated. The palm of his left hand was hot and slightly painful, twitching uncontrollably at times. The system said it was because he had absorbed an overdose of contamination. Although it's a bit earlier than I expected, it has indeed begun the second stage of evolution. My counterfeit is probably furious right now. In the morning, Julian touched his forehead and confirmed he was running a fever again. His throat was so sore it felt like it was on fire. He threw on a jacket and pushed open the door. A staff member who had been waiting outside quickly followed him. "Dr. Rhodes, you're up so early. You don't look well." Julian replied calmly, "I have trouble sleeping in new places. I didn't sleep well. What kind of bed do you prefer? We can procure it. Are you heading to the cafeteria? I can show you the way." The staff member's attitude was warm and attentive. "Rounds. My patient," Julian said, his voice hoarse. His mouth tasted of dry rust. The staff member's face showed an awkward smile. The contaminant had escaped right under their noses. Axton White had been furious, spending 3 hours searching every river and lake in the city but finding no trace of Silas Kane. Silas's file had been sent to headquarters overnight. Soon, he might appear on the control center's bounty list. If you're talking about the patient from the shelter, his condition worsened last night, and he escaped. Relevant personnel are already handling it. Julian nonchalantly opened a bottle of water to soothe his dry mouth. "I see. When can I go home?" If his condition had remained the same, Julian wouldn't have minded staying at the control center, especially with the reassuring presence of the uniformed soldiers. But in his current state, it wasn't ideal. During the fusion with the kingfish, Julian had briefly lost consciousness. He was worried he might suddenly pass out here. The staff member looked troubled. "I'll go ask Captain Thorne." Liam Thorne wasn't the highest-ranking officer at the center, but he had met Julian before, making him a familiar face. Headquarters was concerned that switching contacts would make Julian feel uneasy. They sat down in a semi-open cafe. The food at the center was good, but Liam ate without much appetite. His spirit threshold was only 1600, but due to frequent combat missions, his corruption level was not low. He no longer had a worldly desire for ordinary food. Julian asked the system how Liam was corrupted, as he couldn't see any physical changes. Liam's gaze was clear and determined, with the distinct bearing of a soldier. Even sitting down, his back was ramrod straight. The system provided the details. Liam Thorne, captain of the 3rd Squad, 6th Unit, Special Operations Division. Spirit threshold 1600. Enlisted at 22, began assisting with contamination incidents at 23, and volunteered for exposure to the contamination source to become a warden in the same year. Gifts: tracking, marksmanship, suppressive fire. He looks fine on the outside, but his insides are severely corroded. "I don't really want to look. It's a bit gross. Parasitic eggs are much cuter than parasitic worms. I'll tell you a secret, if he becomes a contaminant, he'll most likely turn into a writhing mass of maggots. White like rice." Julian thanked it, having lost his appetite. The system explained that to become a warden, one must first be exposed to a contamination source. But this exposure had a high probability of causing direct death or mutation. Only a small fraction became wardens. The Institute had developed a special drug that had a chance of reverting newly infected people to normal. But most who volunteered were prepared to die. If they didn't awaken, the drug was useless, leaving only one path. Logically, few would be willing to take on such a high-risk endeavor. But the soldiers of the Federation rarely backed down. This was why the contamination in the Federation was much better controlled than abroad. The Pan-Asian Federation had the strongest wardens in the world, and the largest number of warden teams. Julian remained silent. Liam cleared his throat. "Dr. Rhodes, have you seen the recent news? Do you know what a warden is?" Julian nodded. "I do. That makes things easier," Liam said. "Basically, wardens are divided into 3 types: combat, support, and special. We've tentatively classified your gift, Devour, as a healing type under the special category. Healing gifts are extremely rare. Headquarters has sent a researcher to observe and document. Of course, we'll seek your consent first. You've seen the contamination case in this city. In reality, there are many such cases worldwide, and they are all different." Liam slid a tablet across the table, logged into his internal account. "I don't know if you'd be interested in taking a look." Julian took the tablet. It was a forum, the largest section being contamination case studies. The cases were graded from S to F based on the strength of the contamination source. The outbreak in Port Caligo, which seemed so severe to Julian, was only graded C. Liam explained it was because although it was highly infectious, the fatality rate was low, and the resulting contaminants were low level. Each case had a grade. Julian glanced at the S-class cases. There were 2 so far, named Cataclysm and Divine Kingdom. The status for both was currently unresolved. Surrounding population evacuated. An A-class warden had perished during the evacuation assistance. There were many more A-class cases. The Slaughterhouse, Nightmare City, the Wall of Regret, Riverwood Botanical Garden. Dozens of them, both domestic and abroad. Julian randomly clicked on the Wall of Regret. Description: a narrow alley that appears randomly in a city center. Countless wailing skeletons are embedded in the walls. When a living being passes through, the wall pulls them into a loop of their deepest regrets. Success means escaping the wall. Failure means becoming part of it. No successful cases have been recorded. A total of 7 wardens have attempted this mission, with a 100% mortality rate. The following is the public mission data from the Federation. An audio file was attached. Calling headquarters, this is Grizzly. This will be my last mission report. My corruption level has reached 97. I have gone through 6 loops in the Wall of Regret. The data and precautions are as follows. I regret that I won't be able to see this world return to normal. Do not send anyone to rescue me. Please tell my wife I love her. A note at the bottom read, observation shows the Wall of Regret is expanding. The number of consumed has exceeded 5 digits. International researchers indicate that if left unchecked, its final length could surpass the Great Wall of China. This was a side of the world Julian never knew existed. He thought he was prepared, but faced with these cruel, bloody, and even tragic records, he couldn't help but feel a tremor in his soul. A tremor from his own weakness, and a reverence for those undaunted spirits. This world was on the brink of collapse. Liam tried to make his tone and expression as sincere as possible. We need every bit of strength. You're a healer, you don't need to be on the front lines often. We will do everything in our power to protect you. He placed a file in front of Julian. I hope you will join the Special Operations Division. Julian didn't speak, his face contemplative. This made Liam a bit nervous. After a long while, Julian looked up and asked, is there a retirement plan and a 401k? Is working after 5 considered overtime? The concerns of a working man were always so practical. Liam nodded hastily. Yes. The benefits in our division are excellent. Not only do we have full benefits, but you also get a house upon joining. Julian replied, I have one. A 2,400 square foot penthouse downtown. Market value of $13 million. The penthouse was compensation from the authorities after they had taken him away years ago. Housing prices weren't as crazy back then, but it was still worth several million. And your family enjoys a high subsidy and special benefits. Julian said, my parents are deceased. I'm an only child. Your children get priority admission to top schools. Julian stated flatly, I'm gay. I won't have children. Liam was speechless. Julian's serious replies made him sound like a contrarian at a construction site. Julian coughed lightly and drank some water. What's the monthly salary? In all his years of work, this was probably the first time Liam had been asked about salary. He was momentarily stunned. For people like them, money was the least of their worries. 100,000, Liam said. Base pay plus commission. Julian calculated in his head. It was good, much higher than his salary as a doctor. But considering the patients had become much more hostile, the pay seemed reasonable. Julian took the file and started reading. It was a formal contract, but perhaps because he wasn't military, the constraints were few. Only regular reports to headquarters and 1 mission every 3 months were required. By joining, Julian would receive a fixed monthly supply of the special drug, free access to contamination intelligence, and training at headquarters. He would also have the organization's support in times of trouble. All in all, to attract more people to this high-risk profession, the terms offered by headquarters were quite generous. The system piped in that the control center and the institute were not the same organization. If he wanted to, joining was a good choice. Julian finished reading the employment contract and signed his name at the bottom. At Julian's strong request, Liam assigned 2 staff members to escort him home. Just one night had passed, but the streets looked like they had been hit by a terrorist attack. Shattered glass and fallen streetlights were everywhere. Occasionally, he could see bloodstains and remains, some human, some contaminant. The contaminants in the city could still be eliminated by physical means, so there were many people in military uniform busy on the streets. Julian rolled down the window halfway and observed the outside world. He had been staying at home and had never been out during the day. Seeing it on the news and seeing it with his own eyes were completely different. Due to his enhanced senses, Julian could even see the tear tracks on the face of the officer collecting his comrade's body. Tears mixed with blood and dust, a silent, profound grief. The few dozen wardens in the city, plus the 30,000 assisting soldiers, how could they possibly save all 3 million people? It was clear that during the previous riot, some people hiding in their homes had been dragged out and eaten by angry contaminants. The system's detached tone made Julian frown. It was asking too much for the system to empathize like a human. Suddenly, the system's voice became melancholic. My existence depends on you. Human personality is indeed complex. Whatever you are, I might become. Are you angry at another side of yourself? Julian's expression turned cold. He rolled up the window and clasped his left hand with his right, closing his eyes in discomfort. Something was bulging under the skin there, like a mushroom after rain, about to break through the soil. Back home, Julian started up his long-unused computer. Liam's contact information was in his phone. He had sent a link to an internal forum. Perhaps because the control center had set something up, Julian's IP was no longer blocked by the firewall. He saw the outside world's discussion of the city's lockdown. Contamination, sickness, monsters, mutants, these topics had been trending for weeks. But for those who hadn't experienced it, it was hard to understand the terror. The pace of evolution worldwide was accelerating. The government had given up on information blackouts, hoping that by educating the public, more ordinary people could survive in times of crisis. It also made it easier to recruit wardens. The internal forum was simply called Aegis. All officially affiliated wardens worldwide had an account. The administrators were chosen by each country's contamination control center. To accommodate people from different regions, the forum had a built-in translation system. The forum required a fixed user ID but recorded almost no real information, and posts could be made anonymously. Even the administrators didn't have full viewing privileges. It was said that a foreign government organization had once tried to hack the forum. Not only did they get no information, but their director died unexpectedly the next day. No one dared to try again. Julian hesitated for a long time at the username field. He originally wanted to use Doctor, but the ID was taken. Liam had told him that mission logs of wardens might be partially published on the forum, and the forum name would be used instead of their real name, so he had to be careful. A flamboyant warden had set his ID to "You want some?" which led to him being either teased by his teammates or harassed by strange people during missions. Liam had emphasized that he had to think carefully, as there were no name change cards for sale. At the end, as if remembering something, he added that the guy was ranked quite high on the forum. If he was interested, he could try posting a selfie and teaming up with him. Julian wasn't interested in teaming up. He thought for a moment and entered 2 words. Veritas. Veritas, the Roman goddess of truth. Seemed fitting. This time, his registration was successful. The Aegis forum looked like a relic from the early days of the internet. The UI was clunky and dated, like a final project from a freshman computer science student. It had 3 main sections: technical exchange, bounties and missions, and water cooler. Julian clicked on the contamination case study subforum under technical exchange and read through all the files from S to F grade. Information was crucial. At least in the future, when encountering a contamination source, he wouldn't have to dissect a case to understand its characteristics. The lower the grade of the contamination source, the more detailed the information. The S-class files were only a few lines long, but the file for the C-class parasitic fish was 7 or 8 pages. The system commented that it was normal. Even with the talk of a shared destiny, wardens still had nationalities. He could apply for the control center's internal data, which would be much more detailed. To be honest, the Federation was already very generous. 40% of the data on the forum was provided by Federation wardens. After all, in the current situation, shared destiny wasn't a joke. If the whole world fell, the Pan-Asian Federation couldn't hold out for long alone. Julian was a fast reader, but it still took him 2 full days to read through all the cases. Some of the images were like a psychological attack, making him nauseous. He saw the file for Liam's contamination source, the C-class parasitic worm. The images showed corpses covered in fat, white worms. The plump larvae crawled out of nostrils and ear canals, making him want to drag the uncensored photographer out of the computer and beat them up. The data section also had a warden ranking. It was an annual official evaluation based on spirit threshold contributions over the past year and other political maneuvering. The forum had over 60,000 registered users, but the leaderboard only showed the top 100. Julian scrolled to the bottom and found that the 100th place was You Want Some? Personal Intro, FaceCon, Uglies Stay Away. Axton White's codename was Cicada, ranked 37th. The list also had names that were clearly foreign, like Michael, Odin, Miyamoto Musashi, and so on. Julian scrolled up to the top. The ID was Tyrant. He clicked on it. The profile only had the name hanging there. Nationality, Pan-Asian Federation. The number of views was staggering. Julian was speechless. It was so cringe. Who would name themselves Tyrant? He also noticed that Tyrant's registration date was 2037. This meant that even if he had registered at birth, Tyrant would be 84 years old now. Julian's own registration date was February 26, 2121. He checked others, and the dates ranged from the last century to this one. It seemed the system wasn't malfunctioning. So, contamination and wardens had existed since the last century. They probably couldn't hide it anymore, which was why these strange changes had entered the public eye. Like an old man who had just learned to surf the internet, Julian spent a few days enthusiastically browsing the forum. He only lurked, never posting, but he learned a lot of useful information. For example, when encountering a contamination source, the more you fear, the faster your corruption level rises. The farther away you are, the slower it increases. Also, contaminants were divided into 2 types, biological and psychic. The ones in his city were the former, but powerful contaminants were often a mix of both. Besides that, Julian also saw several posts in the water cooler section offering high rewards for healing items. With the global evolution, besides healing wardens, many special items could lower a person's corruption level. And healing was one of the rarest among the dozens of gift branches. So far, only 3 had been discovered. No wonder the control center was so tense. If Julian hadn't explicitly stated his unwillingness, they would have wanted to send him to headquarters to be enshrined. On the 4th day after returning home, the uncomfortable symptoms in Julian's body finally began to subside. His arm had been aching as if it were being torn apart. He could barely hold a spatula steady while cooking. At night, he would wake up in a cold sweat from the pain. Now that the pain had eased, his body had undergone a new change. Julian looked down at the palm of his left hand. As he stared, the inside of his palm gradually split open, revealing the raw, red flesh beneath. The edges of the slit were lined with sharp, triangular shark-like teeth. Although it looked strange, it was undeniably a mouth. Julian inserted the fingers of his right hand into it. The sensation was odd. His left hand didn't feel much pain, but it certainly wasn't comfortable. His right hand felt like a happy puppy was licking it. He snuck out in the middle of the night and cut off a piece of a bloom's tentacle. The mouth on his left hand ate it happily. It was much more convenient than the white thread feeding method. He asked, "Is my left hand still my hand? Will my body ultimately belong to my soul?" The system laughed and replied, "It's still the larva, and it relies on you. But if you remain in your current state, when it realizes its master is so easy to bully, the kingfish will devour its host." On the 7th day of Julian's return, a news anchor announced in an inspiring tone that after a month of unremitting effort, they had finally brought the contamination under control. The control center stated that after 3 more days of observation, the lockdown on the city could be partially lifted. This contamination incident was classified as a B-level emergency. The source was the C-class contaminant, parasitic fish. The disaster had caused 46,321 deaths in the city, and 456 rescue workers had sacrificed their lives. As she read, the anchor's eyes turned red. Behind every cold death toll was a family, a life, years of joy and sorrow. Julian turned off the TV and was silent for a long time. His social circle had always been small, but thinking of the deceased Dr. Lee, the rich kid, and the missing Silas Kane, he felt a twinge of sadness. Fortunately, a call from Liam Thorne interrupted his thoughts. "Dr. Rhodes, it's me, Liam." Liam's hearty laugh came from the other end. "Captain Thorne." Liam continued, "I'm calling to discuss something with you. Wardens also need contamination sources to advance. Your file has been sent to headquarters, and they are divided. Some hope you can train in the field while ensuring your safety. The world is changing too fast, and personal strength is very important. The other faction wants you to go to headquarters and advance by taking medicine like the bishop." When he mentioned taking medicine, Liam's expression was slightly unnatural. The system commented, "Is it taking medicine or eating people? Even I would like to know. I have to say, of the 13 research institutes in the country, the first research institute is really twisted. A bunch of inhuman lunatics doing experiments that would terrify gods. Sooner or later, they'll face the consequences." On the phone, Liam continued, "If you choose the former, headquarters has already chosen a location. There's an abandoned mountain village in the neighboring city of Deveria. The case is a living dead contamination source, grade D. The highest detected contamination value is 1,100. Besides me, there will be another warden with a spirit threshold of 3,000 accompanying you. If you choose the latter, I will also escort you to the first research institute. The advantage is that it's safer and more controllable. I'm downstairs now. When you've made up your mind, you can come down and tell me your choice." The way Liam said it sounded almost like a proposal. Julian didn't need much thought to choose the former. The institute? He would never go to the institute in his life. The world outside was so exciting. What was the difference between going to the institute and going to prison? Besides, he wasn't a real healing-type warden. Julian put on a down jacket and a mask and went downstairs. Liam was leaning against his car, smoking. When he saw Julian approaching, he quickly put it out. The cigarette but drew a beautiful arc in the air and landed perfectly in a trash can. "Dr. Rhodes." Liam's demeanor was a bit stiff. Julian said, "I've made up my mind. I still hope to have more contact with contamination cases." Julian rarely had worldly desires. Or rather, his emotional fluctuations were very weak. He neither felt great joy nor deep sorrow. He was keenly aware that something was wrong with him, that he was cold and lacked empathy, so he wore a mask of normalcy. He studied hard because the prevailing social norm was for everyone to strive upwards. Whether it was academics or arts, everything he did was because it was appropriate. He neither particularly liked nor disliked it. But the contamination was different. It was like a game with an unknown ending, with new surprises every time he played. Julian liked it immensely. He felt a thrill. Liam looked at him deeply. "I understand. Then I will do my best to protect you, even if that protection came at the cost of his own life." Julian started to say it wasn't necessary. "It's an order from headquarters," Liam replied. Obeying orders is a soldier's duty. At the Contagion Control Center, a middle-aged man under the protection of several soldiers arrived. This was the researcher sent from headquarters, from the Third Research Institute, named Ji-won. He had the look of a scholar, gentle and amiable. The director of the control center stepped forward to greet him, but Ji-won raised a hand, and the director had to retreat awkwardly. Now, he was sitting at a computer watching the precious footage captured by the smart surveillance cameras, the two instances of Julian healing contaminants. Occasionally, Ji-won would press the spacebar to pause, his face thoughtful. "Devour? Huh?" Ji-won muttered to himself. Genesis is highly susceptible to contamination and can't have contact with the outside world, so he's always in a life support chamber. The bishop has a reclusive personality and rarely leaves the institute. To be honest, I don't know much about healing gifts, but he saw the fine scales that appeared on Julian's arm. And devour, this ability. After comparison, I'm more inclined to believe that he came into contact with a special contaminant during this disaster and fused with a part of it. This is a very dangerous act, but clearly he succeeded. So Julian's real gift is something else. He lied and said his gift was devour. The purpose of the lie was to hide his real gift. From this, we can deduce that he knows something. But Julian's past, both online and offline, has been monitored. I'm sure that before this incident, he had no contact with any information related to contamination. So how did he know? Therefore, I conclude that he actually has a gift related to information acquisition. On the gift sequence table compiled by Mr. Xiao Yu, there are 6 related gifts: all-knowing, foresight, information decryption, mind reading, soul detection, and third eye. The most likely one is Ji-won suddenly fell silent, then scribbled something on a piece of paper in a script only he could understand. When he was young, Ji-won and a friend had created a language, a hybrid of Oracle Bone script and cuneiform. Only they could read it. So, whenever he had important information he didn't want others to know but needed to record, Ji-won would use this script. He was 47 this year. He started researching contamination at 20, studying under Qing Chongqing. Qing Chongqing's mentor was Xiao Yu, one of the first to discover contamination in the last century and make it a specialized field of study. In the early 22nd century, due to a disagreement in research philosophy, Qing Chongqing left the first institute and founded the Third Research Institute. As Qing Chongqing's direct disciple, Ji-won was naturally brilliant. Liam and Axton hadn't figured anything out. But Ji-won, just by watching the surveillance footage, had deduced most of the truth. This was why the system was so wary of the institute. It housed the world's most intelligent people with the deepest understanding of contamination. Ji-won pushed up his glasses and put away his pen. By rights, I should report this, but he is subject 18th son. He closed the playback software and chose to delete the 2 videos from the system's back end. A box popped up, requiring him to enter his security password. This deletion wasn't a simple drag and drop to the recycle bin. It would make the 2 videos completely disappear from the world, never to be seen by anyone again. Consider this my repayment for dissecting 18's brain. Should I meet this child? Ji-won waited for the progress bar on the computer to reach 100% and took out an evaluation form. Julian Rhodes. Male 26. Mental state: stable. Corruption level: low. Education: master's degree. Highly perceptive of his surroundings. Personality: cautious, suspicious. Long-term surveillance not recommended, to avoid losing his trust in the control center. Tentatively confirmed as a healing-type warden. Gift: devour. Can use a psychic entity to devour contamination sources. Highly effective on wardens with low to medium corruption levels. Whether he can assist with tyrant's treatment: unknown. Note: due to his low spirit threshold, contact with tyrant is not recommended at this time due to the risk of contamination. Danger level: low. The friend who had created the script with Ji-won was named Lu Cheng. Lu Cheng graduated from Yenching University in 2091 married in 2094, and his only son was born 4 years later. In 2111, he was contaminated and became a warden. In the same year, he was detained at the first research institute, designated as Subject 18. Gift, foresight. In 2113, Liu Cheng's corruption level broke 100, and he became a contaminant. In 2117, he escaped from the institute, and his whereabouts are unknown. It's better not to meet. I held him when he was a baby. The kid has a good memory, he'll recognize me. Ji-Wen paused his writing, thought for a moment, and still feeling uneasy, threw the paper with the cryptic script and the photo file into the shredder. Liam Thorne brought Julian Rhodes to the control center to meet the researcher from headquarters. However, when they arrived, they were surprised to learn that the researcher had already left. Director G is very busy, a staff member said helplessly. He arrived at 8 a.m. and left at 9. He said he had many important experiments to attend to, but he has already completed the evaluation report. The system grumbled to Julian. The researcher they sent this time seems to have discovered my existence. Julian replied, "Be confident you can remove this seams. Looks like I underestimated humans again." Fortunately, he's on your side for now, the system conceded. Countless things happen in the world every moment. Although the system was all-knowing, knowing too much at once would only cause the host's brain to explode, turning him into an imbecile. It existed within a perceptual range, not too large, not too small. Beyond that, it was indeed worthy of its name. Mr. Rhodes, please follow me to receive your uniform and this month's stipend. Julian's information had been registered, and he was now an official employee with a file and benefits. Codename, Veritas. Spirit threshold, 440. Class 1 Warden. Corruption level 3. Unit, Special Operations Division, 1st Unit, 7th Squad. A staff member opened the vault in the headquarters supply building and took a suitcase from a cryogenic chamber. This is the latest galaxy detector developed by the research center. The standard model is a watch. If you don't like it, you can apply to have it changed to something else, including but not limited to necklaces, phones, etc. The detector can monitor your corruption level in real time, as well as the contamination value of nearby contaminants. It also has navigation, positioning, and Bluetooth calling functions. Here's the user manual. You can also choose to disable the GPS and data transmission. The detector was a beautifully crafted, high-tech electronic watch. Julian didn't put it on immediately but pocketed it. This is one of the Institute's most precious inventions, the special contamination drug. Because the raw materials come from contaminants, the cost is extremely high. Please do not sell it for cash. Because this had happened before, the staff member emphasized, if you're short on money, you can contact headquarters directly. Your current cash withdrawal limit is 15 million. The drug was in capsule form, only 4 pills. The standard monthly supply for a Class 1 warden was 2. The other 2 were a performance bonus for his outstanding work in the Port Caligo incident. This drug is good stuff, the system noted. It's different from the medicine distributed to the infected in the shelter. It's a lifesaver in critical moments. Your corruption level is still low, you can stockpile some. This is your ID card. The ID was a card similar to a driver's license, with Julian's photo, fingerprint, and DNA code. For every mission completed, he would receive corresponding contribution points. The points could be used to redeem items, issue missions, or for contamination treatment. Finally, this is the weapon headquarters has prepared for you based on the researcher's report. It was a dagger exquisitely made. Julian drew it from its sheath. The blade gleamed with a cold, blue light. It was a double-edged dagger, ground from the bone of a D-class contaminant. Market price 500 contribution points, the system scoffed. Anything better would be a waste on you and easily snatched by others. It suits you. They've put some thought into it. Are you the deputy director's illegitimate son? Thank you, Julian said, giving it a few swings. I like it very much. The staff member bowed deeply to him. I'm glad you like it. Thank you for your contribution to the future of humanity. I hope to be of service to you again. When Julian came out, he couldn't help but remark, "That's a bit much. I haven't even done anything yet." "It's just talk," the system said. "Who doesn't have a hero complex and a taste for the dramatic? Some people eat that up. You're just benefiting from the sacrifices of others. This respect isn't just for you, but for all wardens in the Special Operations Division. The Institute is theory, the division is practice, and the control center is logistics. The three support each other, searching for a future." Liam was waiting for him in the SUV at the entrance, leaning against the steering wheel, his eyes half closed, looking lazy. After taking the special drug, his corruption level had dropped significantly, from 53 a few days ago to 39. Contact with a contamination source increased the level, while being away for a period would cause it to slowly decrease to a baseline. The drug's function was to lower that baseline. Liam's current baseline was 31, exactly 10 times Julian's. With repeated use, the body would develop a resistance, but it couldn't be helped. Liam waved. "Let's go. I'll take you to meet your captain." He was the captain of the 6th Unit's 3rd Squad. Logically, Julian should join his unit. But headquarters probably thought Liam's spirit threshold was too low, and his missions were too dangerous, so they assigned Julian to a different squad. Liam was quite open-minded about it. After all, with a spirit threshold of only 1600, he was just a D-class. It was hard to feel confident in his ability to protect a healer. Julian was joining the Special Operations Division's 1st Unit, also known as the Dragon Unit. The entire unit had less than 40 members. Foreign wardens had once lamented that, on average, each member of the Dragon Unit was worth 3 aircraft carriers. The 1st Unit hadn't accepted new members for several years. Julian was the only one in 3 years. Julian sat in the back of the car, thought for a moment, first turned off the data transmission, then put the watch on his left wrist. The watch face showed his corruption level. 7. 5. His right hand, 3. 1. The two sides were indeed different. Julian hadn't slept well for the past few days. The village they were heading to was over 120 miles from the city, and the roads were bad. It would take at least 3 or 4 hours. He leaned back and uncontrollably drifted off. Liam noticed his fatigue and said softly, "There's a blanket in the back. Cover up and sleep. I'll wake you when we get there." Julian mumbled an affirmative and fell into a deep sleep. When he woke up, it was already dark. Julian was a bit disoriented and was about to ask why they hadn't arrived yet when he suddenly became alert. He smelled blood. It was unnervingly quiet. More importantly, Liam was not in the driver's seat. "You're finally awake." The system's voice was strained. "Damn it, why did he come over here? I don't have much time. You have to remember what I say. You've encountered an A-class contaminant, the Dream Eater. This is both a dreamscape and reality. What you see may not be real, but it may not be fake either. In short, if you die, you're really dead. You'll become food for the Dream Eater. I wonder what your soul tastes like. Unfortunately, I'm suppressed in this false space because you're not the master of this dream. If it were just the Dream Eater, it wouldn't be this bad. But I didn't expect that damned wall to be here too. The two have combined, creating a nightmare difficulty level. I thought we were going to the tutorial village, but we stumbled into a hidden boss fight. Someone is already on their way to rescue you. The key to leaving is to wake up the master of the nightmare. The only good thing is that, in this dream, you're not a nameless female student. Okay, I can't say anymore. It's about to find me." The system went completely silent. Julian lay quietly in the back of the car, not moving. After a moment, he fumbled for his phone. He shielded the light. The battery was at 90%. No signal. There was a text message from Liam in his inbox. "You're still not awake. I'm gonna check things out. Something's not right outside. Wait for me to get back. Don't go out no matter what. Stay safe." When Julian was a doctor, he noticed that the patients who recovered fastest were the ones who followed instructions. so he stayed in the back of the car until morning. During the night, he occasionally heard screams and calls for help from outside, but he remained still. When morning came, Julian finally found the source of the bloody smell. Liam was pinned to the rear window. His body had been there all night, separated by a thin layer of cold glass, staring at the person inside the car with blood-filled eyes. Several impossibly large worms had crawled out of his ears and were slithering on the glass. Julian's phone fell to the floor. After a long moment, he slowly spoke, his pupils dilated and unfocused. High level of confusion, slight odor of decay. Estimated time of death 36 to 48 hours ago. On the border between the city's outskirts and Deveria, a long stretch of highway was cordoned off. Countless traffic police were frantically busy at the blockade. Control center staff had rushed to the scene and had been assisting researchers with contamination analysis for over 20 hours. Many reporters had arrived, holding up microphones. "Excuse me, what is the grade of the new contamination source in the city? Will it threaten the safety of nearby residents? In the 48 hours since the fog appeared, have there been any survivors?" Behind the police was a thick fog. The gray-black fog churned, like a merciless maw about to swallow everything. The Dream Eater, a class contaminant. Julian had read its file on the forum. Just as wardens were divided into combat, support, and special, contaminants also had different classifications: psychic, biological, and special. The Dream Eater was undoubtedly a psychic contaminant. Its true form was unknown. An area where it appeared would be enveloped in a thick fog. The contamination value was lower at the edges and higher near the center. Peak value 7,200, low point 200. The Dream Eater enjoyed fearful souls. Its feeding method was to pull people into a dreamscape. Death in the dream meant real death. Research showed that its dreamscapes were not created from nothing but were based on the real memories of others. Mutation genes, hypnosis, dream manipulation. A border town had once been turned into an orange contamination zone because of it. The system's choice to go offline was a necessary one. Strictly speaking, it was also a psychic gift. As a psychic entity inside someone else's psychic space, it would be as conspicuous as a flashbang. If it attracted the Dream Eater, the story would be over. Julian was completely focused. The detector on his wrist was still working, showing a value of 3.2. This showed that Julian's inner state was not as calm as his expression suggested. He was at least 0.1 scared. The contamination value here was 270. Julian observed through the glass. The fatal wound was a chest wound. The clothes were intact, with no other injuries. Julian muttered to himself, "The way to break this is to wake up the person who is dreaming." But whose dream is this? Julian didn't know if this Liam was the real Liam. He hoped not. The sky had fully brightened. Julian didn't know if he should get out of the car, mainly fearing a jump scare. The dream might be fake, but he was real. However, Julian didn't hesitate for long. The watch on his wrist suddenly vibrated. He looked down and saw the numbers on the watch face jumping wildly. Contamination value 3,000, 4,000. The value kept climbing, finally stopping at 99.99. The upper limit of the watch was 99.99. Clearly, something was coming, and it was getting closer. The atmosphere became noticeably oppressive, accompanied by a scorching smell of sulfur. It was unbearable. Within 10 seconds, Julian's throat was painfully dry. This value far exceeded the Dream Eater's. Either the previous data was wrong, the Dream Eater had evolved, or what was coming wasn't the Dream Eater but some other monster. Julian wasn't curious. An old proverb about curiosity and cats came to mind. He gripped the dagger in his hand, slowing his breathing as much as possible to reduce his presence. But the contaminant didn't leave as Julian had hoped. It stopped in front of the car door. From Julian's angle, he could only see a section of a suit jacket. There was blood on the white shirt collar. The build was normal and adult male. His hand rested on the car door handle. Julian's senses were on high alert. The moment he heard the door open, he opened the door on the other side and scrambled out. But it was clear that this struggle was futile against the unknown contaminant. A thin iron chain wrapped around his ankle and yanked him back. The world spun, and Julian landed at the contaminant's feet. The smell of sulfur in his nostrils was even stronger. It was so intense that Julian felt he had lost his sense of smell. He looked up at the person in front of him. A male, probably in his early 30s. His exposed skin was burned to the point of carbonization, especially his hands, where the skin had completely melted away, revealing raw red flesh. Ignoring the gruesome wounds, his face could even be called handsome. This was not good news. Institute data had long shown that contaminants that looked more human were likely to be of a higher grade, and usually had two forms. Julian was sure he had never seen this contaminant before, nor had he seen any related information in the database. This meant that any warden who had seen it was already dead, without even sending back any useful intelligence. The person in front of him slowly raised his crimson hand. Julian could feel the scorching heat. He knelt on the ground, unable to breathe from the increasingly thick smell of sulfur. Was he about to die? The thought inevitably crossed Julian's mind. Surprisingly, he felt no fear. Death to him was tranquility. But the next moment, the hand gently touched the side of Julian's face. It was hot, but surprisingly not enough to burn. "Sister, why did you run so far this time?" the contaminant asked, his voice unexpectedly clear, like a spring bubbling over stones. "I've been looking for you for so long. I'm so glad you're okay. Otherwise, how would your brother live on his own?" Julian was stunned. In a flash, he understood what the system meant by "you're not a nameless female student." In the dream, he was this contaminant's sister. Julian fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a student ID. The name on it was Julian Rhodes. The photo had been torn out. At the edge, he could see an M, the insignia of the third high school. The date was 2111, 10 years ago. For Julian, it was also a special year. It was the year his father's mutation had begun. He didn't know the contaminant's name, but since he called him sister, Julian reluctantly played along. Brother. Based on the burns on his brother's body and the lingering smell of sulfur, his brother's mutation gene was related to fire. In addition, he had a chain as a weapon, which seemed to be a special type spiritual item. Julian was strapped into the passenger seat. The contaminant beside him started the car, which was surprisingly humane. The ride was bumpy. Liam's body was jolted off and fell into a ditch, which saddened Julian greatly. Perhaps because he had been staring at Liam for too long, the atmosphere in the car suddenly turned cold. "He's that loser you were online dating, right? You ran away this time to meet him." His brother suppressed his anger and floored the accelerator. "You're in high school. Instead of studying, all you think about is dating. You can date anytime. Why does it have to be when you're supposed to be studying?" "I was in H-City preparing for a lawsuit. The housekeeper called and said you were gone. I immediately flew back to find you. I might even miss the hearing because of this. Why are you so thoughtless? I admit it was wrong of me to get those little boyfriends of yours transferred. But why can't you understand I'm doing it for your own good? When will you learn to be obedient? Like this,